Welcome to the Numerical Tarot, a new tarot paradigm, an alternative to tradition, an axial system of archetypal crystallography, a trans-culturally anthropomorphized life-biased binary influence calculator, a wisdom system and archetype enhancer with harmony of interpretation throughout. The content of all the videos in this series are excerpts, edits and brief summaries from the eBooks All Things Are Numbers and All Things Are Patterns, links below. For a more complete explanation of each idea, additional reading might be helpful. Hopefully the basic ideas come across enough to pique your interest in trying this alternative approach to tarot. One of the most important and powerful features of the numerical tarot, and this whole study of existence, consciousness, life and meaning, is how cards in the deck relate to each other via a binary matrix of subdividing opposites, and how, in relating to each other in that manner, the whole deck becomes a calculator of binary influence. This is, of course, accomplished by using abstract, fundamental concepts of nature, and not religious or spiritual dogma or complicated mythology or mysticism handed down from ancient texts of long ago and far away. It uses plain and simple ideas from plain and simple sources that were here long before any religion in its mysticism, and most probably exist everywhere in the universe, even where there is no religion or mysticism. So, now that we understand a bit about the organization of ideas on a matrix grid of overlapping binary opposites that use invented grammatical terminology to communicate, let's elaborate on this design a bit more. Lots of people already associate the idea of up with things being positive or increasing, and down as its opposite. In the human brain, left and right hemispheres are seen to have different functions that are in many ways opposite to each other. In psychology, people are often labeled as introverted or extroverted, making use of the ideas of in and out. In the numerical tarot, these fundamental directions of orientation can be applied to our grid matrix organization of numbers to transform our flat two-dimensional deck of cards into a three-dimensional entity in space. Here is a diagram to illustrate how a simple number line can be seen as a three-dimensional entity in space. In this schema we see the four suits of the minors transformed from four flat stacked lines to four lines in three-dimensional space. The beginning of each line, 1, 2, 3 and 4, represent the fundamental direction of front. The positive lines, coins and cups, represent the fundamental direction of up. The analytical suits, coins and staves, represent the fundamental direction of left. These fundamental directions of orientation relate directly to the new grammatical terms presented in the video previous to this one. Up and down are positive versus negative antonyms. Left and right are quantitative versus qualitative coronams. Front and back are provocative versus evocative transonyms. In and out are inclusive versus exclusive infonyms. On and off are active versus passive proxonyms. In this way, the numerical tarot deck is a manifest entity. Like all manifest entities, it has a place in space. That square in the middle is your face, looking forward, or front. You think with an analytical, left, brain and a synthetical, right, brain. Your mood is up, or positive, or down, negative. Your personality comes out, or stays in. In three-dimensional space, different directions of orientation suggest different forms of human perception and expression. Some people are verbal. Some people are visual. Some people are active. Some people are passive. Some people are physical. Some people are emotional. Some people are gregarious. Some people are detached. If we think of a tarot deck as an entity in space, then the same can be said for every card in the numerical tarot deck, particularly the minor suits. By making the numerical tarot deck a three-dimensional entity in space that uses fundamental directions of orientation, subdividing binary opposites, and invented grammatical terminology to its construction, the numerical tarot deck becomes an axial system of archetypal crystallography. In this way, it is able to do things that no other tarot deck can do. Crystals form along invisible lines of force. Archetypes are invisible lines of force. By identifying the up versus down, and left versus right, and front versus back bias of any function of life, we are able to build a crystallographic constellation of binary influence that will attach that function of life to a card in the deck, and thereby see that card and all its archetypal roots, as the source of that function of life. This method of analysis shows how a deck of tarot cards, or anything else for that matter, can be subdivided into successive binary opposites, to reveal a cumulative effect upon the character of each card, or anything else for that matter. Up, down, left, right, front, back, in, out. Abstract concepts with no ethnic, cultural or religious bias, and yet, they speak volumes. These features are offered as tools for determining the context of any situation in life. When attempting to interpret how anything might be affecting anything else, content plus context equals meaning. In some cases, though, we will find people who don't want to define context or content to others around them, because they want the meaning of things to remain amorphous, ambiguous and multivalent, are personal just to them. To some, defining anything in any way at all only leads to psychic impoverishment, as the definition of things only serves to destroy that person's ability to see everything in life as personal expressions of the self meant only for the self. This is of course a choice that people make based on personal preferences. In point of fact, nothing is really destroyed by definition, only changed, altered or viewed in a different, but still viable way. To say that something is destroyed by definition is to make a personal preference known with extreme prejudice, an extreme prejudice that ultimately reveals a lopsided approach to thinking. In fact, neither approach is any better than the other, each is a tool for doing a particular job. We should not vilify one in expressing our personal preference for the other. Toward this end of helping to determine the context of anything, this study of tarot and consciousness offers this tool, for those who want to define context, so that the content they present to others has a knowable meaning outside of their own brain. Up and down, left and right, front and back, in and out are translated into binary alternations that ultimately answer the questions of who, what, where, when, why and how. In the last video we defined new terms of grammar, in order to better understand the context of any discussion where transferring a thought from one brain to another with accuracy is important. We have also mapped ideas across a flat grid matrix as well as a three-dimensional diagram, using fundamental directions of orientation as a guide. As a way of abbreviating and codifying the process of defining and tracking multiple binary divisions of context, these parameters of up, down, left, right, in and out, etc., can be simplified by describing them with a simple line that is either solid or open, similar to the I Ching, except producing a quintagram instead of a hexagram. In this system, a quintagram points to a universal, archetypal context. Whether or not something is defined as fitting that context is determined by the subjective perceptions of individuals answering the journalistic questions of who, what, where, when, why and how. If we do not want meaning to be understood by anyone but ourselves, do not answer these questions of context. If we do want meaning to be understood by someone other than ourselves, then please do answer these questions of context. Each line in a quintagram has a character all its own, before we even determine its binary bias. Combined together, the lines of a quintagram determine an ultimate cosmic orientation for any mundane entity, event. We cannot escape context. We can, however, ignore it, or obfuscate it, for the purposes of multivalent ambiguity during subjective interpretation. But we can't escape it. So, after we determine the up, down, left, right, front, back, in, out and finally on, off bias of a particular number, the results of those combined influences are summed up with the simplified quintagram. Yes, a quintagram looks very similar to a hexagram from the I Ching, but obviously it is not the same. The similarity to the I Ching is only in its use of a simple line that is either solid or open, to indicate the influence of the various binary possibilities suggested within the numbers in spacechart, in a most abstract way. A quintagram is read from left to right. The outer box, whether intact or open on one or both sides, tells you at a glance the basic orientation within the deck matrix. A solid box equals 1, 2, 3, or 4 of either coins or staves. A box open on both sides equals 6, 7, 8 or 9 of either cups or swords, etc. A number from the first half of coins or staves is usually going to be more physical. A number from the last half of cups or swords is usually going to be more emotional. We have to look at the 5 lines within the box to determine the specifics of each number. For example, a number with an open box on both sides, like the example here, might be more emotional, and if line 5 is solid, as in the example here, we might be able to determine the emotion to be more dynamic than pacific. A dynamic or active emotion might be one that is felt stronger than a pacific or passive emotion. A dynamic emotion might be more inclined toward eventual action. A pacific emotion might just be a felt emotion that is not expressed. A dynamic emotion might be one that can be verbalized when felt, whereas a pacific emotion might be more elusive and harder to describe. If line 1 is also solid, as in the example here, the emotional state might be more investive than divestive. An investive emotion is an emotion that tends toward the cultivation of more, something to hold on to. A divestive emotion is an emotion that tends toward capitulation, letting go. If you haven't done so already, use your copy of the Numerical Tarot deck to see what card it reveals, the 6 of multiplication or hearts or cups. The title of the 6 of multiplication is the familiar environment. Keywords on the card include passion and prosperity, nurturing and nourishing. Now look at the illustration Pamela Coleman Smith drew on her 6 of cups. Are those children friends or family? Is that house their home, where they flourish like the flowers in hand? This card is expressing an emotion. It is not a passive emotion that is hard to describe, it is an active emotion at the surface. It is not an emotion of capitulation, it is an emotion to hold on to, like our memories of childhood. In the Quintagram for this card, line 2 is open, making this an intangible emotion prone to implicit rather than explicit expression, meaning more visual than verbal. Line 3 is also open, meaning that this is an emotion of reaction rather than action, more evocative than provocative. This is the card of the emotional reaction we get when someone is being a friend, or when someone invites us into their family. For those who really like the idea of generating hexagrams rather than quintagrams, this system can actually accommodate that need. However, it should be noted that the meanings for the hexagrams that result from this system will not necessarily correlate with the hexagrams of the more popular system known as I Ching. There may be some coincidences where ideas from this system in the I Ching line up, when a quintagram uses its optional line to generate a hexagram. But it should be kept in mind that the hexagrams generated from this system are not intended to match up with the hexagrams of I Ching at all. When using the optional line, we are expressing our willingness to view things in variable degrees of extreme or moderate, with an implication that most, but not all instances of extremes are usually considered bad by those who accept the idea that anything in life could ever be viewed as good or bad. For those who don't like the ideas of good or bad, the ideas of moderate and extreme can still be applied as expressions of degree without ever interpreting them in good or bad ways. When applying the optional moderate or extreme line to a quintagram, it would be added to the beginning of the 5 designated lines of the quintagram. By adding the optional line to the beginning, the resulting hexagram can be split evenly into 2 trigrams, just like a hexagram of I Ching. Without the optional line, a quintagram can still be divided in 2, but the resulting split would be between a bigram and a trigram and not trigram and trigram. In either case though, as bigram and trigram or trigram and trigram, the split between sides shows us how the resulting series of binary calculations direct us to 2 different places. The first trigram, or bigram, determines the suit of tarot we are in, while the second trigram tells us which number along that suit we have found. In this deck design, we metaphorically associate the suits to the 4 seasons of an Earth cycle, and each number of a number line to the 4 elements of an Earth-like entity. In this way, these 2 trigrams automatically generate a metaphorical title for each hex, our quintagram. When combined with the outer box that tells us at a glance what our matrix orientation is, we generate a 3-part title for each hex, our quintagram. In the example given, the resulting title is Fire of Summer as Emotion, confirming the positive passions and emotions of friendship just covered in the previous analysis. Keywords, like qualitative, expressive and inclusive, taken from the numbers in space chart, also help us to rationalize the placement of the concept of friendship with the 6 of cups. While the 2 locations of fire and summer are subsequently viewed in a crossing, warp and woof way, to reveal the whole grid of possibilities as a giant quilt of ideas. The fabric of our being. In our evolution of our deck design, we show how a 4-fold model can produce the 9 numbers of numerology seen within the Numerical Tarot deck. We then divide that number line into 2 rows of 9 within the major icons seen as parents to the children of the minor pips and their 4 rows of 9. By creating this matrix of subdividing opposites, a theoretical model of existence, with only 4 stages of development, becomes a grid of ideas to be illustrated on little pieces of paper we have come to call tarot. We then go about illustrating these various subdivisions of opposites with less universal metaphors of life that we can relate to on a more human level. This is how we end up attaching things like the 4 seasons of an Earth year to the 4 suits of our deck design. But where many might also want to attach the 4 elements of alchemy and astrology to the 4 suits, in the approach given here, we find that when relating one fourfold idea to another fourfold idea, they don't necessarily have to correlate one-to-one in describing the same exact thing, like a tarot suit. They can at times be juxtaposed against each other, in a warp and woof manner, to create a mixture of ideas that work together to reveal a much greater truth about the fourfold nature of existence. Thus, by employing what I call a warp and woof approach, we create the fabric of our life or every fiber of our being, as well as the fabric of spacetime, covering every possible experience out there. Whenever anyone talks about a card from the minor pips, they always identify which card they are referring to with 2 points of reference, a number, and a suit. In this way, they are employing the crossed grid or warp and woof approach being presented here, and acknowledging it as an underlying structure behind the character of any card. As mentioned, I prefer to base my underlying structure upon ideas that I believe to be universal, like the universal metaphor already given in this study of a planet in space having the same fundamental parameters as our more abstract model of existence and its 4 concentric circles in point, or 4 nested spheres in center. Universally though, not every manifest form of existence has a surface that could be thought of as earthen. Not every manifest form has a watery atmosphere, or even air. Thus I would typically substitute fire, earth, water and air with the more abstract and universally applicable concepts of force, form, flow and frame brought out in another video in this series. Likewise, not every manifest form experiences seasons like those on Earth. Thus I would typically substitute spring, summer, autumn and winter for the more universally applicable concepts of addition, multiplication, subtraction and division. But, at the same time, if asked to create a deck with a more lyrical appeal, that humans could more easily relate to, I would not hesitate to use the elements and the seasons to symbolically illustrate these more universal, abstract concepts. With the optional good, bad, or moderate, extreme line at the beginning of a quintagram, creating a hexagraphic sequence of lines, the resulting binary choice that is being expressed by that additional line fits well with the layout of the warp and woof quilt idea just presented, where all possible upright and reversed instances of all cards and quintagrams in this system are displayed on a single grid. The warp and woof quilts are a convenient summary of everything this system offers. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Hope it made sense. Links to eBooks, decks and merchandise below. And if anyone is interested in drawing a deck based on this system of organization, don't hesitate to contact me for a collaboration.